Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Barbara Scott and I am the Executive Director of the Parents League of New York. As I welcome you this evening, I thought I would share a little bit about Parents League as a matter of background. Parents League was founded in 1913 as a collaborative effort between parents and independent schools. Today, our aim at Parents League is to make parenting just a little bit easier as we partner with schools and educational providers to bring our advisory services and parenting resources to families and the wider public. In fact, we serve thousands of parents and caregivers as they navigate the school admissions process and seek out resources from camps to tutors to enrichment programs. We also offer parent and caregiver education programs examining a wide range of topics from technology usage in the home, financial aid and test prep and admissions, and ways to enhance at-home learning for young children, among others. And finally, we publish a variety of print resources, including our annual review, which is a compilation of parenting articles written by school leaders, psychologists in the health and wellness space, and parenting experts. But of course, among the many things we do best is offer our parents opportunities to come together for workshops and in forums to discuss topics of interest. And that is what brings us here today. The format for the evening will include a nice conversation between myself and our special guests. We invite you to turn your camera on if that's the right thing for you to do tonight. We will have a conversation that lasts about 45 minutes or so, and then we will leave time at the end for questions. We will invite you to put those questions in the chat directed to me, Barbara Scott, and then as time allows, we will answer those questions at the end. So now on to the introductions. We have special guests with us this evening. We have doctors, Chris Thurber and Hendrie Weisinger. Dr. Thurber is a thought leader in positive youth education. He has dedicated his professional life to improving how caring adults teach and lead young people, as well as to enhancing the experience of adventurous youth who are spending time away from home. Dr. Thurber is a graduate of Harvard University and UCLA. He has served as a psychologist and instructor at Phillips Exeter Academy since 1999. He and his wife, Simonita, are the proud parents of 2 boys. They live in New Hampshire in the Northeast of the United States. Dr. Hendrie Weisinger is the author of a plethora of books, including The Emotional Intelligence at Work, The Emotionally Intelligent Financial Advisor, The Emotionally Intelligent Real Estate Agent, Anger at Work, The Power of Positive Criticism, and a New York Best Time seller, Performing Under Pressure. Dr. Weisinger has spent 3 decades helping individuals and their organizations enhance their personal and work effectiveness through innovative applications of clinical, counseling, social, organizational, and evolutionary psychology. He is a popular blogger for Psychology Today, The Huffington Post, EcuNet, lifehack.org, and other popular sites. His early clinical training and practice provided him the opportunities to decipher the emotional complexities of giving and taking criticism. He also became one of the first psychologists to provide training in this subject to the mental health community. So it is not surprising that he has spoken to dozens of mental health organizations, hospitals, and school systems. Welcome, gentlemen. You both have illustrious backgrounds and bios, and we are just thrilled to have you with us. If I've missed anything in your CVs that you'd like to share, please do, please do share it with our audience.
All right, the book, like Parental Pressure. This will get that out of the way. There we go.
That's right. So the gentlemen are here to talk about their book, The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure. At the beginning of the book, you are great about defining terms. Can you explain the difference between stress and pressure?
Yes. Well, I will. You heard Hank's bio, so I'm going to give this question a try, and then because Hank is a specialist in criticism, he can critique it. But here's how to think about stress. Stress is whenever the demands of a situation exceed or start to exceed our perceived resources, our capacity to do something. So if we think this is going to be challenging, I'm not sure whether I can do this. I'm going to try climbing this mountain, but I don't know what kind of shape I'm in, and I don't know the elevation, and I don't know whether it's going to be really cold at the top. So I'm starting to wonder, do I have the resources to meet the demands of this task? And if I think to myself, I can do it, I've got all kinds of different clothes in my backpack, and I'm in really good shape, I wouldn't feel stressed. If I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt and it looked blustery at the top, and I started to question whether I had the proper clothing or the stamina to make it to the top, then I would feel stressed. Okay, so that's, where are the task difficulty and my abilities aligned? And whenever the task difficulty starts to get greater than our perceived abilities, we feel stressed. But pressure is different. And of course, that's the focus of this book. Pressure is what we perceive the stakes are, and if what other people's expectations are. So for example, if we want to stick with hiking, if the hike up this mountain were incentivized by some kind of reward, there's a treasure chest at the top with $1 million, but I got to make it up to the top in under 60 minutes if I want to have the treasure chest. Otherwise, it's going to disappear. Or somebody needs my help at the top of the mountain, and I just got a call on my cell phone that they have a serious injury and I need to get there right away. Now there's some like external demands, and the stakes are kind of high, or very high in different scenarios that I outlined. And so I'm gonna feel a lot of pressure. Pressure can also come internally. So maybe you can talk some about that.
Yeah, I think the important thing, or a quick way to cut to the chase so people can tell the difference, because when you treat it the same, like a student who treats every stressful moment as a pressure moment, feeling of do or die, will experience a lot of havoc in his or her life. So the question I would tell people to ask is, do I feel overwhelmed, or do I have to perform in any given moment? And if you're feeling overwhelmed, most likely that is stress. And that's why you will feel overwhelmed and exhausted.
You want to try and take, let me.
Say it again?
I think that was just somebody who was unmuted briefly.
Okay.
The joys of Zoom.
And pressure is about performance. There's a lot of ways to reduce stress. You can take a nap, you can go on a vacation, you can delegate, you can prioritize, you can blow things off. And in pressure, in a situation, there is only one response, and that is successful completion of the task. And underlying that is, if you don't succeed when you are experiencing pressure, you get into these do or die types of thoughts. So pressure is when you got to perform. When you're watching a sporting event, you never hear the announcer saying the stress is increasing. It's always pressure is performing, and stress is a sense of being overwhelmed. When you pressure, you experience anxiety, sometimes fear, embarrassment if you fail. When you experience stress, you're feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, tired. That's why when people say you need a vacation, you can take a vacation in a pressure situation and tell a joke, but you still have to perform the task. So maybe that sort of clarifies.
It does. Thank you so much. So what does unhealthy pressure do to young people?
Yes. Well, all right. So let me show you a quick slide here. Here's oops.
See, this is a pressure moment, right?
It is. Well, I don't know. I guess, I have to perform, but with apologies that you're getting an extra graphic here, but the mental health outcomes of pressure are pretty significant. And we wrote this book because we were very concerned, as we looked at the literature and drew from our clinical experience, that young people who are under a great deal of unhealthy pressure are more anxious, more depressed, importantly, are performing worse. And sometimes they're so distressed that they're having suicidal thoughts or ending their lives by suicide. So it's as serious as it gets. And the distinction between healthy and unhealthy pressure is we experience healthy pressure when either internally or externally, we're considering a range of possible outcomes that in our minds would be successful. But when we think about successful outcomes as quite narrow and only encompassing one or two possibilities, that hurts our mental health and hinders our performance. Unhealthy pressure also involves, when we're talking about parental pressure, which we are, over investment on the part of the parents in the outcomes that the child achieves.
Yeah, I think a point to remember is on this particular subject of parental pressure, that is defined from the teen's or child's perspective, meaning that when the teen perceives that the parental expectations are exceedingly high or in their mind impossible to meet, that is when parental pressure starts to become unhealthy. It is the teen's perception. It's like parental warmth, which is very important. A parent can say, I'm very warm and supportive. No, only if your teen or child says you are. That is why when we talk about parental expectations, one of the blunders that many parents make is they set up the expectations based on their own aspirations, and they blend them. You know, the parent might be have been a great athlete, so now they want their son or daughter to be an athlete. But the truth is, the child might have no interest in that at all. So one of our strong points that we want parents to remember is when you think of the expectations you have for your kids, are they child-centered based on their capabilities and their interests, or are they based on the expectations that your parents had for you and your interest and what you think is important?
Thank you. So early on in the book, one of the suggestions is to aim to be a support parent. Can you briefly describe the difference between being a support parent and being a pressure parent? I think you started down that road, but if we can continue, that would be helpful.
Sure. So a pressure parent focuses on a very narrow outcome or defines success very narrowly. They define the outcome as very high stakes. If you don't achieve this, you're not going to amount to much. As Hank was saying, they over personalize success and in that way, like over control the child's behavior. Whereas a success parent, and what's really important here is they have the same high standards. This book is not about lowering your standards or being permissive, but those support parents define success broadly and focus more on effort than outcome. So if you're doing your best, if you're trying your hardest, and this is where you end up in the track meet, or this is where you end up getting accepted to college, that's fantastic. The stakes are not do or die, as Hank said, but rather the stakes are put in a range of possible outcomes that make the child understand this is one of many attempts to do well. And if you're not happy with the outcome, you can try again. Or if there's something else that you discover that you want to do differently next time you attempt, fantastic. We are born being able to learn from our mistakes, but with formal schooling, we become very self-conscious about making mistakes, and our grades are in large part not a reflection so much of our effort, but how many mistakes we make. So we think of mistakes as really bad, but a support parent understands that this is the best learning opportunity provided that the child has put forth their best effort. And then, as Hank said, they're making sure that they're not overly invested and wanting outcomes for their child that they missed themselves when they were young.
Yeah, and I think another important factor is competitiveness. That one of the things we found that pressure parents are highly competitive because they are usually competitive in their own lives. So it becomes that it's not enough to keep up with the Joneses. You literally have to beat the Joneses. And that develops a mindset in the child, teen, where they are always trying to compare themselves to others, a rank order mindset. Their self-esteem becomes based on how well they are doing in comparison to other kids. Whereas support parents, their emphasis is simply having the expectation of just do your best and be the best you can. And that helps the son or daughter develop a mindset of excellence, where they are just focusing on developing themselves rather than measuring their worth to other people. And urgency is another factor. That with pressure parents, everything is, you got to do it now because it's so competitive and everything is so important. So you have to do it now. So the kid comes home from Christmas vacation, and the first thing the parents say is, did you do the college applications yet? Did you do your homework yet? Everything has to be done now. And that, again, adds, not only does that put pressure on their child, but it also increases additional stress on top of that, which makes it even more difficult to perform. Parents should know that no kid does better under pressure. A C student is never rising to the occasion and getting perfect scores on their SATs, but many times the A student will perform below his or her capability, i.e. choke. And inadvertently, parents many times facilitate that. And anytime your son or daughter has a test and you say, this is really an important test, we know that you are well-intentioned when you say that. But the reality is, the more important you make something, the more pressure you experience. If a kid doesn't care about a test, maybe he's already got a certain grade in it or just doesn't care, there is absolutely no pressure. So even though it's counterintuitive, what parents really want to do to help their teen perform under pressure is minimize the importance of the situation. That is why it's just another test is actually the best thing you can say, rather than this is the most important test you are ever going to take, or the most important performance, or the most important game, or most important audition. We call that shrinking the significance of the event.
As consistent as so many parents try to be, myself included with 3 children, it's really helpful to know that all parents veer into different parenting styles and use different lanes in their parenting from time to time. Can you speak more about parenting styles and the benefits of certain kinds of styles, perhaps over others?
Yeah, of course. And I liked the way you prefaced this question. I do a lot of staff training at summer camps and a lot of faculty development workshops at schools. And before I had kids of my own, preached consistency as if it were possible, and it's not. But it is something that we can strive for, and that's great. We need to humanize the process of parenting. As I said, Hank and I go to great lengths to explain that transitioning from unhealthy pressure to healthy pressure, or from being a pressure parent to a support parent, does not involve lowering your standards, and has the great benefit of better performance and better mental health for your kids. So they're strong reasons, compelling reasons to make these transitions. But we're always trying to strike the balance, and the research is pretty clear about the benefits of this. In the parenting research, which we make reference to in the book, broadly construed, you're looking at dimensions of warmth and control. So you can think sort of about a Cartesian coordinate or Cartesian coordinates, and with a high degree of warmth where you're expressing empathy, and a high degree of control where you're setting appropriate, age-appropriate limits. That's called authoritative parenting, and that's probably where we want to spend the most amount of time. If you have a high degree of warmth and very little control, that's permissive, which you can do some of the time, special treats or have ice cream for dinner. And once in a while, that's fantastic. But over time, of course, if kids feel like there are no rules, no limits, they will equate that with you're not caring. And as Hank just said, we assume that the parents we're speaking with are loving, well-intentioned parents who want the best for their kids, just as we want for our kids. If control and warmth are both low, I would say that's neglectful. And if control is very high and warmth is low, that's more authoritarian. And kids experience that sort of bossy, over-controlled style as something against which they need to rebel. And that's not associated with good outcomes, either in performance or mental health. So to say again, we may, there may be times when we forget something. We say, oh my gosh, I'm a neglectful parent. We all forget things once in a while. There may be times when we say, because I said so, because we don't have the bandwidth to offer a rationale at that moment. But the more we can return to a nice balance between warmth and control and spend time in that authoritative quadrant, the better.
Yep. And I also think a good example to show how all these factors interact in terms of parental style with parental expectations. I, for example, can have very high expectations that my son is going to win the chess match. And those expectations might be unrealistic and he loses. It doesn't matter that my expectations were unrealistic if I am still warm and loving. So what if I had unrealistic expectations? I'm still being supportive and loving, versus the parent who has those unrealistic or high expectations. The kid doesn't perform, and the parent now treats their son or daughter like they are a professional athlete and they have a contract. You lost, you get nothing. And that becomes a very cold parent. And this is what we mean when we say that many parents, especially the pressure parents, are more concerned with the outcome rather than the effort or the process. The typical question a pressure parent will ask is, what did you get? They don't care about how much you studied and the effort. All they are looking for is what that outcome is. And that's one of the reasons, one of the effects of unhealthy pressure is cheating. I always like to point out, if kids are so smart, why do they cheat? And that, I say, is attributed to the amount of parental pressure that they are experiencing, because in their mind, if they don't excel, they will be rejected from their parents. And that is not hyperbole. You've seen that in a million movies where that scene plays out, from creating suicide, like in Dead Poets Society, Bad News Bears. I mean, this is a time where fiction is really imitating life.
So on page 111 of the book, there's a powerful statement that you all make, that empathy is the admissions ticket to your child's soul. How does expressing warmth and empathy actually lead to a greater connection? If you're taking this balanced approach and you're the authoritative parent, and you leave yourself some wiggle room to veer into neglectful parent or permissive parent at other moments, how is sort of empathy the key, right?
Yeah. First of all, can I just say how good it feels that you have read this book? Honestly, Hank and I have done, probably upwards of 75 webinars, and it's not always clear that people have read the book. And I give you enormous credit for hosting us and preparing these questions. And they're fantastic questions, unlike some of the questions that we've gotten in the past, because you've read it. So there's my genuine praise. Thank you. And now, of course, I've forgotten the question.
Empathy.
Oh, so empathy is very much the admissions ticket to your child's soul, because without a child of any age, most of you in the audience tonight or watching this recording, if you're blessed, have at least one parent who's still alive, and you still have a parent-child relationship. But here's the key. Unless the child feels a connection to the parent or coach or clergy or mentor, they are not going to listen to the good advice that that adult, that trusted adult, may have. And so we stumble as loving, well-intentioned caregivers when we hear an expression of distress from our child, which could be something like, "You're not going to believe how much homework I have to do this, I have to do that, and my teacher's a jerk, and the chemistry test is tomorrow instead of Friday," and we're getting the sense that our child is overwhelmed. And we feel that and we understand, but we don't state that. So we don't make a connection. Instead, we jump immediately into problem solving and say something like, "Okay, well, you know what you need to do? You need to make a list of what's due and rank order it, and, or take the smallest task and do that first, or take the big one and break it down into parts." We're full of good advice because we're experienced. We've spent more time on the planet than our children. But we need to bite our tongues at that moment and resist the temptation to offer a solution to the problem for two reasons, a big one and a small one. The small one is your child probably already has a pretty good idea of how to solve the problem. But the big one is any advice that you offer to anybody who's in a highly aroused emotional state, especially if it's strong negative emotion, is not going to hear or understand what it is that you're saying with regard to the problem, or they're only going to understand a piece of it, and they're much more likely to be dismissive. So when we empathize, when we say, "You sound really overwhelmed," or "Wow, that sounds frustrating," or "Your teacher sounds like she's really underprepared," or "She's a real jerk," or whatever it might be, then we've made an emotional connection. And without that emotional connection, our kids are not going to engage in any sort of logical discussion after that about what to do, or even be able to respond to our query about, "Would you like some help?" So think about all of the great aids you have as a parent as wonderful merchandise loaded onto a truck, and you have to drive that truck from one side of the river to the other. Empathy is the bridge, until you say, "Wow, you sound really confused," or "That sounds frustrating," or "I can see how sad that made you," or whatever it is. You need to make a statement that contains an adjective that describes what you believe their thoughts or feelings are. And if you're a little bit off the mark, they'll correct you. They say, "No, it's not that I'm sad. I'm just really angry." "Oh, okay, that's it. You're angry. And I think I understand why. Tell me a little bit more." But making a connection on an emotional level and acknowledging how our kids feel or what they're thinking before we launch into praise, criticism, problem solving, or anything else is how we forge that connection.
Yeah, and I think it's important for parents to remember, because we tend to think in terms of empathy as being event oriented. Kid has a disappointment or a great experience, and then you're going to respond. But it's really an ongoing process of your daily responses that's the importance of empathy, that it's ongoing. And what it does, you have an empathic response, it allows you to enter the world of your child, because you start to see things from their point of view. You're entering their emotional landscape. And when you can enter their emotional landscape, you can understand them better. And that's when you can really generate an empathic response. I like to tell people that whenever your son or daughter or your partner or somebody at work comes up to you and they say they had a bad experience, "I screwed up my test, didn't give a good presentation," whatever, before quickly responding, as Chris said, if you can step back and in your own mind think of a situation that you had a similar experience, doesn't have to be the same, but a similar experience, you will relate to that person more empathically. The problem, as Chris said, is that we rush in. There's two parts of that empathy response. The first is the protectiveness of it that we get from our animal instinct. But if you rush in too quickly, you are depriving your child of the chance to solve a problem for him or herself, or to deal with their feelings. One parenting style is the parents have a rescue fantasy. Whenever their son or daughter has a problem, the parent gets so anxious that they have to solve it because they don't want their son or daughter to experience any type of distressful feelings. So by stepping back, reflecting, and then responding, you give them a chance also to develop a sense of their own competency of struggling with difficult emotions and situations. Just because they said something or they're talking to you doesn't mean that they want an answer from you. Sometimes they just want their feelings validated. And sometimes that's the best you can do.
Thank you. As I think about, the elephant in the room, I think for ambitious and, parents with lots of aspirations for their kids, it often leads to a discussion of parents' worry or anxiety around the college process. So is there a way to sidestep the intense pressure that parents with big ambition have around the college process?
Yeah, you can talk about your own experience.
Yeah, I mean, my boys are 17 and 19. One just finished his freshman year in college, and the other is about to graduate high school. So we've been through the college process, my wife and I, with our two boys fairly recently. Culturally, the way to permanently sidestep this would be to have all colleges and universities in the United States or North America, or maybe around the world, modify admissions criteria to include more interpersonal skills, morality, creativity, and de-emphasize quantitative measures or performative kinds of achievements. We devote the epilogue of the book to that plea and aspiration for higher education. Until that happens, and if you want, when you read this book, you can start with the epilogue and then begin with the introduction after that. But really, the way to sidestep it, at least I'll speak from personal experience for my boys and for my wife and me, was to do what Hank and I recommend in the book, which is define outcomes broadly. And as you said, maybe the elephant in the room is parents who are themselves high achieving, have very high aspirations for their children. And Hank and I applaud that. As long as those are realistic expectations for that child. As Hank said earlier, if the child with their best efforts is achieving C's or B's in math, it is unrealistic for them to think that they're going to be admitted early to MIT proposing a math major. And no matter how hard the parents wish for that, is not going to come true. So we need to accurately calibrate our expectations for what our child's capacities are and make sure those expectations are realistic. And define success broadly. It took me 5 years and 3 different universities to complete college. And it turned out to be a wonderful education with a lot of geographic and linguistic diversity, something that I don't necessarily wish on other people. The diversity part, yes, but the strife along the way, not so much. It's pretty convenient if you can start college and end college in the same institution, but there are thousands and thousands of schools that are good matches to your child's interests and abilities. And if you emphasize that, we're looking for a good match to your interests and abilities, then I think you can sidestep some of the pressure that comes from the college admissions process, being very focused on Ivy League schools plus MIT plus Stanford, or very focused on Division I athletics. And to be very clear, Ivy League schools are wonderful. They may also not be a good fit, some of them, for your child's interests and abilities. Division I, schools with D1 athletics are wonderful. But if your child is not an athlete, why would you want them to go there? So focusing on the match and focusing on a range of successful outcomes, and most of all, focusing on effort more than a particular school, that's what's important. And here's something very practical, because I've, as Hank said, just been through this. We ask other kids as parents, because we can't get away from this sort of, comparative mindset some of the time. Where did you get in? A much better question is, how do you feel about where you're going? Or what are your hopes for next year? Or when you get to wherever you're going, because I really don't care, what do you hope to accomplish, right? Success has so much more to do with what you do while you're in school, not where you went. Every college and university has a network of alums. Every college or university will help prepare kids for careers or graduate school, provided that they put forth a lot of effort.
Yeah, and I want to add, to really simplify it, to me, there's two sets of parents. Parents who want to get their kids into the best school for themselves. Hello, Varsity Blues, as you saw in the actual scandal, that case, as well as in the film, the parents are concerned about getting their kid into the best school so they can tell their friends, my kid just got into this particular school, and so on. Now, that is one set of parents. And the other set of parents are the ones who want their kids to go to the best school that they could get into, because they want them to get the best education that is capable. Those are two different types of parents. And what I recommend is that I find in the first case, the parents are concerned with getting their kid into the best school, but not necessarily the right school. And I like to tell parents that the best school is not necessarily, and Chris, I'm reiterating what he just said, is not necessarily the best match or the right school. Why do kids transfer? I mean, every year kids are transferring. How do you get yourself into a situation and then after years say, this is not the school for me? And I say it's because they had the wrong focus to begin with. They were looking to get into the best school rather than what is the right school. So that's the guideline that I would tell parents to go into. And another observation, many parents will say to their kids, just do your best. That's all we care about. And the kid does his best and he comes home with a C, and then the parents get upset. I could never understand, why are parents getting upset if this is the best that the child can do? And to me, that taps into their own disappointment, and again, back to their own aspirations. Every parent, including myself, probably at one time has an aspiration that their son or daughter will do something great. And then as the child grows, and we like to hope that the parent starts to formulate realistic expectations, you get rid of, they're not going to do something great, but that doesn't mean that they can't be a great person and have a great life. So right is much better, in my opinion, than getting into best.
Thank you. So much of what you both responded with makes me think of a couple of things. One is Carol Dweck's work on mindset, right? And that growth is possible over time, and mindset contributes to that. And parents having the mindset that as they calibrate, to use your term, calibrate expectations with capacity, but that capacity can grow over time. And the other thing that it makes me think about is Lauren Pope's book, Colleges That Change Lives, right? That experience of college is seemingly so undervalued today, right? That there's a set of experiences that are right for every child. As we move along, one of the things that I think is always interesting is being in partnership. If you're fortunate enough to be in partnership as you co-parent or have a spouse, and you might have different approaches. And how do you calibrate that? How do you navigate the differences in the approaches that parents have with parents, in the parenting of a child or two or three?
Right. No, I'm surprised. I thought maybe Hank and I had perfect marriages because we always agree with our spouses, and no, I'm joking. It's impossible to agree all the time, just like it's impossible to be consistent as a parent. We are always co-parenting. If you're a single parent or married or have a partner or spouse, whatever that status is, you're also co-parenting with teachers, with coaches, with camp counselors, with mentors, with clergy, perhaps. And so we're collaborating with lots of other trusted adults who influence our child or children's growth and development. So such a great question because it applies to everyone. I think that two things are important that come to my mind when there are differences of opinion or approach or style. One is, as long as you do it in a civil and respectful way that models good communication, it is appropriate in many instances to reveal that difference of opinion in front of your child. I mean, chances are they're going to figure it out anyway, even the youngest kids. But, my own kids have said it can, I'm sure that because they're teenagers, will also say that my wife and I are terribly annoying and not very cool much of the time. But when you actually ask them, well, what has it been like to listen to me and Mama debate a little bit what approach you might take in a certain situation, or how we want to handle something like the college process, or whether you're going to wrap up gymnastics and stick with violin or vice versa. I think that it, again, humanizes the experience of parenting. Think as long as the discussion, as I said, is civil and uses clear communication, I think it can be a healthy thing to disagree. Also, keep in mind, if we're good listeners with our partner or spouse or other trusted adult, we might listen to what they have to say and change our minds. And that's a wonderful thing to model for kids as well.
Yeah, I think it's important in that situation for each partner to have the attitude of, I want to find out how come you perceive the situation this way, and get them to articulate their thoughts and their feelings. And so then you can find out what is the basis of this disagreement. What are we perceiving differently? It's the same kid. So what are we perceiving differently? I think a good exercise that parents can try is think of 3 areas of your kid's life, maybe like school performance, what their major interest is, and anything else about them, and each write down what you think it is. And then you can compare, and if you're off, then instead of using the discrepancy to start an argument, use the discrepancy to build consensus and to get accurate perception so that you can formulate consistent, realistic and positive expectations. If I think my son, should be getting an A, or at least a B, and my partner says, no way, puts down a C, that becomes a problem. And you can start to see how that is going to play havoc for the child, because they're going to get one message from the father, one message from the mother. And that can literally drive a kid crazy.
Well, we certainly don't want children
Yeah.
can be driven crazy. It's hard enough to be parents to add that to the pile. I would like to turn now, gentlemen. We have lots and lots of questions in the chat, and I'm going to try to run through them and might, in fact, not get to them all. So, audience, hang in there with me. I hope that you will hear something that resonates for you, even if it
You know, I
isn't.
just want to say one more thing, because what you said was very interesting. You said we certainly don't want to drive them crazy. And that is the whole point, that these are well-intentioned parents. And I don't want to drive my kid crazy. Yeah, but you are. The way that you are parenting, the amount of pressure, the unrealistic expectations, the urgency, comparing your son or daughter to the kid next door so that you can feel good, that does drive a kid crazy.
So one of our questions that's very directed at you both is, the authors have talked repeatedly about setting and having realistic expectations based on a child putting forth their best effort. But what about motivating children who are not putting forth their best effort? What if your child says, I could get an A, but I don't want to put in the extra work. I don't feel like doing the extra credit, or practicing the piano for another 20 minutes, or going to the weight room to prepare for a sport. What might a response there be?
Well, we want to get to as many questions as possible, so we'll be as brief and succinct as we can.
And how old is the kid?
Yeah.
You know, how old is the kid? You know, a question is, when do you start listening to your son or daughter when they don't want to do something? Is it when they're 5? Is it when they're 15? When they are 17? And the other thing I would want the person who asked that question to think about is, why is that so important to them? Maybe it's because, well, they started something and they should finish it to learn the importance of responsibility and commitment. I would say that's nonsense. I would say that it's equally important as a life skill for a child to quickly identify things that they do not like. And just because the kid says, I don't want to do it, I'm not interested, I don't want to play the piano for another 20 minutes, that does not mean that he or she is lazy. As one of my professors said, there's no such thing as a lazy kid. What that really means is the kid is not doing what the parents want them to do. So it isn't about forcing the person. That's the operative word. If they feel forced, that becomes unhealthy pressure. If you want to motivate your son or daughter, then you have to think more creatively as how you can increase their interest in something, because when you are interested in something, nobody has to tell you to practice. I can assure you, nobody had to tell Beethoven to practice playing the piano.
So we're gonna stick in the music, sports, performance arena. We have a parent of a kindergarten student who started playing the violin just a few months ago. She appears to have a good deal of talent and loves it most of the time, especially when a new song clicks. The problem is she seems to be a perfectionist, and she breaks down when she can't get something on a second try. So it doesn't seem as if she can improve. And I have tried to, the parent saying, I have, tried to be encouraging and point out areas of improvement, but the child themselves is so hard on themselves. So how do we, move into a mode of celebrating mistakes that in a positive way, and yet the child is still so hard on themselves?
Yeah, I would start with empathy and get really good at saying, I can see how important it is for you to get this right on the first try. Pause, silence, see how the child responds. It's really frustrating to not be able to play this as well as you would like. Pause, silence, let the child respond. However old the child is, and this child is 5 or so in kindergarten, stepping out of that perfectionism and experiencing more of the joy of completing a piece or really nailing it, being able to play it start to finish well, whether it's row, row, row your boat or a Paganini Caprice, is going to only happen if they feel that emotional connection with one of their primary caregivers.
And safe to make mistakes.
Absolutely.
On that is important.
It's great. Go ahead.
I was going to say, again, every parenting style is different. What works for you might not work for somebody else. What works for me might not necessarily work for you. But when you mention crying at that age, what I used to find very effective with my daughter is any time that she would start to cry out of like frustration or not getting what she wanted or whatever, my first question would always be, what hurts? And then she would stop for a second and she'd say nothing. And I said, what are you crying for? And then we can move on and talk something else. You have to take the crying out of the loop as a response because it'll prevent her. It's like a sign to me of early frustration. So managing, and also you can get her to do things in other parts of her life and point out successes, sometimes on a subtle level that carries over to playing the task that you are really concerned about or want her to enjoy.
So we have a range of questions about how might a parent understand what is in fact their child's best. And we have an elementary school parent who, is thinking about things like, third grade homework is supposed to be 20 minutes. And of that 20 minutes, your child is supposed to spend some time writing. And, the time is kind of parsed out. And yet the child perhaps does not meet that 20-minute threshold. How do you support and show support, for a child and their learning goals with clarity that can help you understand what is a child's best and how they are maybe meeting expectations or are not?
Yeah, I think it's a convenient shorthand that a lot of educators use to talk about time. I've given you a math assignment that should take about 30 minutes, or I've given you, a one-page essay that should take about an hour to write. And as Hank just said, there's so many individual variations in the way that people, not just young people, learn and produce work or perform. And we've got to be enormously respectful of those individual variations. And we wouldn't ever really know, I think, what a child is capable of unless we provide opportunities for them to do unstructured, free play. Because once you put a child into a structured situation, whether that is gymnastics practice or a violin lesson or a classroom setting, and I'm sure the parents who are listening to this can identify a variety of different classroom settings. Maybe it's discussion based, maybe it's project based, maybe it's Montessori and more exploratory, maybe it's a more traditional chalk and talk kind of classroom. But when we impose that structure, suddenly, as Hank was saying, we're taking the child and putting them in what we anticipate is a helpful box, but it may not be. Oftentimes it is, because those boxes are based on a lot of experience. But if you want to understand what your child's capacity is to reason, to create, to problem solve, to manipulate objects in their mind, to think hypothetically, you really only can do that when you liberate them from the structure of lessons and school and things. And there's nowhere near enough unstructured free play in any of our lives, especially young people's lives. It's why I'm such an enormous advocate for overnight summer camp, and perhaps to start out day camp. But look, overnight summer camps were created in this country just after our Civil War as an antidote to, or a complement to, what professional educators recognized were the limitations of a traditional classroom setting. Kids are sitting, they're listening, and they're memorizing. Now that's more old-fashioned sounding, but so much of that happens now as well. But what is really helping them flourish is to be up and moving and interacting and creating. And, yes, there is a place for formal education, of course, but that needs to be nurtured and complemented by something that has less structure and allows for more creativity. And then you're going to start to see the child will start to recognize in themselves. These are beautifully complementary institutions, formal schools and summer camps. And I think it's a mistake and I'll just say, both of my boys spent all of their summers at camp, and now they're both working at camp. They never did an internship. There wasn't anything else besides camp that they did during the summer. And they're both going to really good schools. So, obviously it is not a prerequisite to structure the entire summer or make them study SATs. Should they study SATs or ACTs? Yeah, of course, but some. You need to give them that freedom, and unstructured free play is how you're going to discover what their capacities are. And then you can take that information and say, okay, well, given what I know about their capacities to focus, to concentrate, to create, to problem solve, to reason, I'm going to apply what I know to this particular instance of tonight's math homework. And my estimation is that they're capable of better, or my estimation is this far exceeds what their capacity is.
Yeah, I also think you cannot helicopter your kids, and monitor their homework. That becomes a losing proposition. And what I found and recommend is that the faster you can turn over school responsibility to your child and make it between your child and their teacher, the better off the child is, and the more he or she will internalize that sense of responsibility because they want to achieve and do their best, rather than feeling they are forced to doing their best. And that's hard for many parents to do, because we love our kids, we don't want to see our kids fail. We feel hurt when they do, or embarrassed, or whatever, how you want to slant it. So we rush in and we help them. I used to laugh to myself when my daughter was at a private school in LA, and they'd have science projects, and the fifth graders would bring in their science projects. My daughter's was terrible because she did it herself. All the parents, I could tell when a parent has done the kid's project, and then they make believe that the kid did it, and that becomes a false sense of self-esteem that they are creating. Mm-hmm. So I think those are important points to think about.
So we've talked across the ages and stages, and we have a wide range of folks here, which is fantastic. We do have a question from a parent of a college student. Do you have any advice with regard to supporting a college student? So often, legally they turn 18, and somehow, the government says they're legal adults, and yet they have a lot of growing to do. So what advice do you have for that older child who's even, in college, making their way through late adolescence and toward adulthood?
Well, first of all, I would say to that parent, congratulations on making it that far. That's awesome. I think that, as Hank said, the sooner you can give your child a sense of agency and control over what they are producing, the more you cultivate this sort of intrinsic motivation. We all know as parents that we, especially with younger kids, we can come down really hard on them and, force them to do something. And maybe you temporarily get, good work product, but it so harms the relationship that you can count on some mental health issues and a decrease in performance if that is consistently your style, really overbearing. Developmentally appropriate also applies to college and university students, as you said. This is a young adult, and I think a wonderful approach, and it probably comes more intuitively to most parents because of what you said, that kind of, okay, legally we have this sort of semi-arbitrary decision that, at 18, you're considered an adult, at least for some things like the draft, but you're still going to have to wait 3 years to drink in the United States. So there are different benchmarks. However, I think best thing to ask your college student is, things like, what has become clear to you since the last time we talked? Or what's the best thing that's happened since we spoke last week? Or tell me what's exciting to you. All of those questions are kind of getting at what is intrinsically motivating to them. To ask, is there anything that I can help with? Rather than, oh, you need to be doing this, 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 and this. If we stay that directive as kids are in college and beyond, it just stirs up a lot of resentment.
Yeah, I think all the things that Chris was saying, you're doing that before your son or daughter is in college.
Oh, yes,
And
right.
it's not now that they're in college, I'm going to ask these questions. Those are things as the way of the interaction that you develop, for 15 years before your son or daughter does go to school. So it's everyday interactions, not just when they're going to college. Because I have found that when parents have raised confident and enthusiastic and optimistic kids, you have to trust them to succeed. Trust your kid to succeed. They probably will come to you if you do that when they need your input and support, rather than keeping it within them.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've trained them to feel psychologically safe when they have an issue that they can speak to you about. That's why it would be natural, rather than thinking that you have to do something special now that they're in college.
So thank you both so very much. Where are some of the places that you can purchase the Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure if a parent came to this book talk and this is the ground zero, the start point for them, and they haven't read the book? Where can we find it?
Amazon.com. And the good thing is you can order books 24/7. So I want everybody to know they can actually order the book before they go to bed.
And I would add that you can also buy it on the Parents League website.
Oh, fantastic.
We have added your book to our
Great.
visiting authors bookshelf, and we are partnered with Bookshop, which supports independent bookstores.
Thank you.
So thank you both so much for your time this evening, and most importantly, for your contributions to the health and wellness space of young people.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for giving us this opportunity. And, for anyone who's listening and feeling maybe a little bit discouraged or rethinking something that they said or did yesterday or last week or a year ago, I would just say that there is no statute of limitations on parenting. And you can always go back to your child and say, however old they are, I was thinking a little bit about our conversation yesterday or last year, and I thought of something else that I would like to say, or if I could say it again, I might say it like this, or what do you think about that? And that is such a joy for kids to experience, and know that their parents are committed to this sort of continually nurturing the relationship. So don't feel bad about the past, feel hopeful about the future.
Terrific. Well, thank you again. And we very much look forward to other ways that we can be connected to you. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.